Beg pardon, sir, said the soldier, saluting at the doorway to the officer's bathroom. Duty officer's compliments, and can you come straight away? Colonel Horace sighed, put down his razor, and used the flannel to wipe off the remains of the shaving soap. He had been interrupted shaving that morning, and had tried several times during the day to finish the job. Perhaps it was a sign he should grow a mustache. What's happening? He asked resignedly. Whatever was happening, it was unlikely to be good. An aircraft, sir, replied the private stolidly. From Army HQ? Dropping a message cylinder? I don't know, sir. It's on the other side of the wall. What? Exclaimed Horace, dropping all his shaving gear, picking up his helmet and sword, and attempting to rush out, all at the same time. Impossible! But, when he eventually sorted himself out and got down to the forward observation post, an octagonal strongpoint that thrust out through the perimeter to within 50 yards of the wall, it quite clearly was possible. The light was fading as the afternoon waned. It was probably close to setting on the other side. But the visibility was good enough to make out the distant airborne shape that was descending in a series of long, gradual loops. On the other side of the wall, in the Old Kingdom. The duty officer was watching through big artillery spotter's binoculars, his elbows perched on the sandbagged parapet of the position. Horace paused for a moment to think of the fellow's name. He was new to the perimeter garrison, then tapped him on the shoulder. Jorbert, mind if I have a look? The young officer lowered the binoculars reluctantly and handed them across like a boy deprived of a half-eaten lollipop. It's definitely an aircraft, sir, he said, brightening up as he spoke. Totally silent, like a glider, but it's clearly powered somehow. Very maneuverable and beautifully painted, too. There's 2 people in it, sir. Horace didn't answer, but took up the binoculars in the same elbow-propping stance. For a moment, he couldn't see the aircraft, and he hastily panned left and right, then zigzagged up and down, and there it was, lower than he expected, almost in a landing approach. Sound stand to, he ordered harshly, as the realization struck him that the craft would land very close to the crossing point, perhaps only 100 yards from the gate. He heard his command being repeated by Jorbert to a sergeant, and then bellowed out, to be taken up by sentries, duty NCOs, and eventually to hand-cranked klaxons, and the old bell that hung in the front of the officer's mess. It was hard to see exactly who or what was in the craft, till he twiddled with the focus, and Sabriel's face leapt towards him, magnified up to a recognizable form, even at the current distance. Sabriel, the daughter of a Borson, accompanied by an unknown man, or something wearing the shape of a man. For a moment, Horace considered ordering the men to stand down, but he could already hear hobnailed boots clattering on the duckboards, sergeants and corporals shouting, and it might not really be Sabriel. The sun was weakening, and the coming night would be the first of the full moon. Jorbert, he snapped, handing the binoculars back to the surprised and unready subaltern. Go and give the regimental sergeant major my compliments, and ask him to personally organize a section of the scouts. We'll go out and take a closer look at that aircraft. Oh, thank you, sir, gushed Lieutenant Jorbert, obviously taking the we to include himself. His enthusiasm surprised Horace, at least for a moment. Tell me, Mr. Jorbert, he asked, have you by any chance sought a transfer to the Flying Corps? Well, yes, sir, replied Jorbert. 8 times. Just remember, Horace said, interrupting him, that whatever is out there may be a flying creature, not a flying machine, and its pilots may be half-rotted things that should properly be dead, or free magic beings that have really never lived at all. Not fellow aviators, knights of the sky, or anything like that. Jorbert nodded, unmilitarily, saluted, and turned on his heels. And don't forget your sword next time you're on duty, officer, Horace called after him. Hasn't anyone told you your revolver might not work? Jorbert nodded again, flushed, almost saluted, then scuttled off down the communication trench. One of the soldiers in the forward observation post, a corporal with full sleeve of chevrons denoting 20 years of service, and a charter mark on his forehead to show his perimeter pedigree, shook his head at the departing back of the young officer. Why are you shaking your head, Corporal Anchi? Snapped Horace, irked by his many interrupted shaves and this new and potentially dangerous appearance of an aircraft. Water on the brain, replied the corporal cheerfully, and rather ambiguously. Horace opened his mouth to issue a sharp reprimand, then closed it as the corners of his mouth involuntarily inched up into a smile. Before he could actually laugh, he left the post, heading back to the trench junction where his section and the RSM would meet with him to go beyond the wall. Within 5 paces, he'd lost his smile. The paperwing slid to a perfect landing in a flurry of snow. Sabriel and Touchstone sat in it, shivering under oilskin and boat cloak, respectively, then slowly levered themselves out to stand knee-deep in the tightly packed snow. Touchstone smiled at Sabriel, his nose bright red and eyebrows frosted. "We made it." "So far," replied Sabriel, warily looking around. She could see the long gray bulk of the wall, with the deep honey-colored sun of autumn on the Ancelstieran side. Here the snow lay banked against the gray stone, and it was overcast, with the sun almost gone, dark enough for the dead to be wandering around. Touchstone's smile faded as he caught her mood, and he took his swords from the paperwing, giving the left sword to Sabriel. She sheathed it, but it was a bad fit. Another reminder of loss. "I'd better get the books, too," she said, bending in to retrieve them from the cockpit. The 2 charter magic books were fine, untouched by snow, but the Book of the Dead seemed wet. When Sabriel pulled it out, she found it wasn't snow-wet. Beads of dark, thick blood were welling up out of its cover. Silently, Sabriel wiped it on the hard crust of the snow, leaving a livid mark. Then she tucked the books away in the pockets of her coat. Why was the book like that?" asked Touchstone, trying, and almost succeeding, to sound curious rather than afraid. "I think it's reacting to the presence of many deaths," Sabriel replied. "There is great potential here for the dead to rise. This is a very weak point." "Shh!" Touchstone interrupted her, pointing towards the wall. Shapes, dark against the snow, were moving in an extended line towards them, at a deliberate, steady pace. They carried bows and spears, and Sabriel, at least, recognized the rifles slung across their backs. "It's all right," Sabriel said, though a faint stab of nervousness touched her stomach. "They're soldiers from the Ancelstieran side. Still, I might send the paperwing on its way." Quickly, she checked that they'd taken everything from the cockpit, then laid her hand on the nose of the paperwing just above its twinkling eye. It seemed to look up at her as she spoke. "Go now, friend. I don't want to risk you being dragged into Ancelstier and taken apart. Fly where you will, to the Clares Glacier, or, if you care to Aborson's house, where the water falls." She stepped back and formed the charter marks that would imbue the paperwing with choice, and the winds to lift it there. The marks went into her whistle, and the paperwing moved with the rising pitch, accelerating along till it leapt into the sky at the peak of the highest note. "I say!" exclaimed a voice. "How did you do that?" Sabriel turned to see a young, out-of-breath Ancelstieran officer, the single gold pip of a second lieutenant looking lonely on his shoulder straps. He was easily 50 yards in front of the rest of the line, but he didn't seem frightened. He was clutching a sword and a revolver, though, and he raised both of them as Sabriel stepped forward. "Halt! You are my prisoners!" "Actually, we're travelers," replied Sabriel, though she did stand still. "Is that Colonel Horace I can see behind you?" Jorbert turned half around to have a look, realized his mistake, and turned back just in time to see Sabriel and Touchstone smiling, then chuckling, then out-and-out laughing, clutching at each other's arms. "What's so funny?" demanded Lieutenant Jorbert, as the 2 of them laughed and laughed, till the tears ran down their cheeks. "Nothing," said Horace, gesturing to his men to encircle Sabriel and Touchstone, while he went up and carefully placed 2 fingers on their foreheads, testing the charter they bore within. Satisfied, he lightly shook them, till they stopped their shuddering, gasping laughter. Then, to the surprise of some of his men, he put an arm around each of them and led them back to the crossing point, towards Ancelstier and sunshine. Jorbert, left to cover the withdrawal, indignantly asked the air, "What was so funny?" "You heard the colonel," replied Regimental Sergeant Major Talklish. "Nothing. That was an hysterical reaction, that was. They've been through a lot, those 2. Mark my words." Then, in the way that only RSMs have with junior officers, he paused, crushing Jorbert completely with a judicious and long-delayed, "Sir." The warmth wrapped Sabriel like a soft blanket as they stepped out of the shadow of the wall, into the relative heat of an Ancelstieran autumn. She felt Touchstone falter at her side, and stumble, his face staring blindly upwards to the sun. "You both look done in," said Horace, speaking in the kindly, slow tone he used on shell-shocked soldiers. "How about something to eat? Or would you rather get some sleep first?" "Something to eat, certainly," Sabriel replied, trying to give him a grateful smile. "But not sleep. There's no time for that. Tell me, when was the full moon? 2 days ago?" Horace looked at her, thinking that she no longer reminded him of his own daughter. She had become a Borson, a person beyond his kin, in such a short time. "It's tonight," he said. "But I've been in the Old Kingdom at least 16 days. "Time is strange between the kingdoms," Horace said. "We've had patrols swear they were out for 2 weeks, coming back in after 8 days. A headache for the paymaster." "That voice, coming from the box on the pole," Touchstone interrupted as they left the zigzag path through the wire defenses and climbed down into a narrow communication trench. "There's no charter magic in the box, or the voice—" "Ah," replied Horace, looking ahead to where a loudspeaker was announcing "Stand down." "I'm surprised it's working. Electricity runs that, Mr. Touchstone. Science, not magic." "It won't be working tonight," Sabriel said quietly. "No technology will be." "Yes, it is rather loud," Horace said in a strong voice. More softly he added, "Please don't say anything more until we get to my dugout. The men have already picked up something about tonight and the full moon." "Of course," replied Sabriel, wearily. "I'm sorry." They walked the rest of the way in silence, slogging along the zigzagging communication trench, passing soldiers in the fighting trenches, ready at their stand-to positions. The soldiers' conversations stopped as they passed, but resumed as soon as they turned the next zig or zag and were out of sight. At last they descended a series of steps into Colonel Horace's dugout. 2 sergeants stood guard outside, this time charter mages from the Crossing Point Scouts, not the regular garrison infantry. Another soldier doubled off to the cookhouse to fetch some food. Horace busied himself with a small spirit burner and made tea. Sabriel drank it without feeling much relief. Celestier and the universal comforter of his society, tea, no longer seemed as solid and dependable as she had once thought. "Now," said Horace, "tell me why you don't have time to sleep." "My father died yesterday," Sabriel said, stony-faced. "The wind flutes will fail tonight, at moonrise. The dead here will rise with the moon." "I'm sorry to hear about your father. Very sorry," Horace said. He hesitated, then added, "But as you are here now, can't you bind the dead anew?" "If that were all, yes, I could," Sabriel continued. "But there is worse to come. Have you ever heard the name Caragor, Colonel?" Horace put his tea down. "Your father spoke of him once. One of the greater dead, I think, imprisoned beyond the 7th gate." "More than greater. Possibly the great," Sabriel said bleakly. "As far as I know, he is the only dead spirit to also be a free magic adept." "And a renegade member of the royal family," added Touchstone, his voice still harsh and dry from the cold winds of their flight, unquenched by tea. "And he's no longer imprisoned. He walks in life." "All these things give him power," Sabriel continued, "but there is a weakness there too. Caragor's mastery of free magic, and much of his power in both life and death, is dependent on the continual existence of his original body. He hid it long ago, when he first chose to become a dead spirit, and he hid it in Celestier, near the village of Wyverley, to be exact." "And now he's coming to fetch it," said Horace, with terrible prescience. Outwardly he looked calm, all those long years of army service forming a hard carapace, containing his feelings. Inwardly, he felt a trembling that he hoped wasn't being transmitted to the mug in his hand. "When will he come?" "With the night," replied Sabriel. "With an army of the dead. If he can emerge out of death close to the wall, he may come earlier." "The sun," Horace began. "Caragor can work the weather, bring fog or dense cloud." "So what can we do?" asked Horace, turning his palms outward, toward Sabriel, his eyes questioning. "Eborson." Sabriel felt a weight placed upon her, a burden adding to the weariness that already pressed upon her. But she forced herself to answer. "Caragor's body is in a spelled sarcophagus under a cairn atop a little hill called Docky Point, less than 40 miles away. We need to get there quickly, and destroy the body." "And that will destroy Caragor?" "No," said Sabriel, shaking her head wistfully. "But it will weaken him, so there may be a chance." "Right," said Horace. "We've still got 3 or 4 hours of daylight, but we'll need to move quickly. I take it that Caragor and his forces will have to cross the wall here? They can't just pop out at Docky Point?" "No," agreed Sabriel. They'll have to emerge in life in the Old Kingdom and physically cross the wall. It would probably be best not to try and stop him. I'm afraid we cannot do that, replied Horace. That's what the perimeter garrison is here for. A lot of your soldiers will die to no purpose then, said Touchstone, simply because they'll be in the way. Anything and anybody that gets in Caragor's way will be destroyed. So you want us to just let this thing and a horde of dead descend on Alcestier? Not exactly, replied Sabriel. I would like to fight him at a time and a place more of our choosing, and if you lend me all the soldiers here who have the charter mark and a little charter magic, we may have enough time to destroy Caragor's body. Also, we will be almost 35 miles from the wall. Caragor's power may only be slightly lessened, but many of his minions will be weaker, perhaps so weak that destroying or damaging their physical forms will be sufficient to send them back into death. And the rest of the garrison? We'll just stand aside and let Caragor and his army threaten the perimeter? You probably won't have a choice. I see, muttered Horace. He got up and paced backwards and forwards, 6 steps, all the dugout would allow. Fortunately, or unfortunately perhaps, I am currently acting as the general officer commanding the whole perimeter. General Ashenburg has returned south due to, ill health. A temporary situation only. Army HQ is loath to give any sort of higher command to those of us who wear the charter mark. So the decision is mine. He stopped pacing and stared back at Sabriel and Touchstone, but his eyes seemed to see something well beyond them and the rusty corrugated iron that walled the dugout. Finally, he spoke. Very well, I will give you 12 charter mages, half of the full complement of the scouts, but I will also add some more mundane force. A detachment to escort you to, what was it, Docky Point? But I can't promise we won't fight on the perimeter. We need you too, Colonel, Sabriel said in the silence that followed his decision. You're the strongest charter mage the garrison has. Impossible, Horace exclaimed emphatically. I'm in command of the perimeter. My responsibilities lie here. You'll never be able to explain tonight anyway, Sabriel said. Not to any general down south or to anyone who hasn't crossed the wall. I'll think about it while you have something to eat, Horace declared, the rattle of a tray and plates tactfully announcing the arrival of a mess orderly on the steps. Come in. The orderly entered, steam rising around the edges of the silver dishes. As he put the tray down, Horace strode out past him, bellowing, Messenger! I want the adjutant, Major Tyndall, and the CSM from A Company, Lieutenant Eyre from the Scouts, the RSM and the Quartermaster, in the operations room in 10 minutes. Oh, call in the transport officer too, and warn the signal staff to stand by for coding.